Yes, I can, suddenly, yes, I can. Gee, I'm afraid to go on has turned into, yes, I can. Take a look, what do you see? 133 pounds of confidence, me. Got the feeling I can do anything, yes, I can. Something that sings in my blood is telling me, yes, I can. I was just born today, I can go all the way, yes, I can. 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 Hey, yes, I can.
No, you can't.
Yes, I can!
Are you ready?
CMST Talks.
CMST Talks.
CMST Talks.
CMST Talks.
CMST Talks.
CMST
Talks.
CMST
CMST
Talks.
Talks.
CMST Talks.
CMST Talks.
CMST Talks.
CMST Talks.
Wonderful. CMST Talks is brought to you by Community Music Schools of Toronto. Expanding from Regent Park School of Music, this new name acts as an umbrella, better connecting and reflecting all of their sites, celebrating the history in Regent Park and Jane and Finch, looking to reach even more communities in the future. As always, I'm Thompson, Egbo-Egbo. It's a pleasure to be here. We've missed you last month, and so it's nice to be back and joining us. Well, welcome to the 15th installment of CMST Talks. I'm broadcasting live from Regent Park today in the Daniel Spectrum, as there's an event that I'm a part of later. This episode, we will be speaking with Diane, Kolin, who's also a music faculty, and we're going to be talking about accessibility in music education. Diane has dedicated lots of her focus and study to disability in music and how we create pathways to accessibility to those individuals. We will talk about approaches, perspectives, and theories that will aim to push forward in our attempt to revolutionize the classroom, our practices, and our mindsets. We will also hear from and get demonstrations from two artists with disabilities, Precious Perez, who is blind, and Kris Haplin, who has cerebral palsy. But first, let's welcome Diane Kolin to our virtual space. Diane, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for welcoming me. I have an issue with my voice. I'm kind of losing it a little bit, so I apologize for that.
No problem. You know what? This is actually great because I haven't been in the Jane and Finch location in a very long time, and we were saying earlier, you're at a facility that I have never been to. So do you want to just tell us a little bit about what you teach and give us a little bit of your background?
Yes, with pleasure. Okay, so I have two hats. I'm co-teaching the ECM class on Saturday morning, so the early childhood music class, and I'm also a voice teacher in Peach in Jane and Finch. And it's great. I really enjoy this position. It's really a pleasure. I work with Veni in ECM, and lots of people I see every Saturday morning that makes me smile every Saturday, every weekend.
Amazing. I used to teach up at that location 2 years ago, I think probably in the first or second years that we went up there. So it's great that the school has been able to continue up there and expand and grow in that neighborhood. So thanks again this is such a wonderful topic because I think it brings many different things to light. And there's so many places we could start, but maybe we start just with you about your journey and how you have used music, or how you approach music, and some of the challenges and opportunities that you've found yourself.
Sure. So I'm French. I was born in France, and I started music very, very early. In fact, I was raised in Holland, where music is everywhere in classrooms. So I got the opportunity to even sing in a musical at an early age. It was great. So for me, I grew up with the idea that I wanted to go to the arts, but I also have a neurological disability, which is progressive. And right now I'm in a wheelchair. But when I grew up, it was progressive. I used crutches, and then I had mobility issues, and today I'm in a wheelchair. But growing up with that and facing the issue of France, which is pretty inaccessible as a country, I had several issues. One was music education. I had the chance to be on crutches when I was doing music education. But when I'm reflecting on that period, all the buildings had stairs and no access for wheelchair. And this didn't affect me directly until I got to university. And in university, it was horrible to go to university. I had to choose other paths, but the idea is that I kept music in the background all the time. I always had music. And I was specifically interested in music history. And some of the periods I was interested in were Beethoven and Liszt. So Ludwig van Beethoven and Franz Liszt, two composers from the classical music, but also a lot of jazz. And so I got a lot of training in jazz. And I had these two things that followed, that I kept with me for many, many years. And I also love writing. So I kept in touch with some of the musicologists in France I'm still working with today. And I started writing in a journal, and I'm today the editor-in-chief of this journal. So I kept these friends forever with me. But when I went to another totally other field than music. I went to computer engineering, so really something totally different. But I still kept music. I was still having jam sessions with my friends, and I worked for a company where we were doing ringtones, the first ringtones before we have iPhones today, and we can set our ringtones by ourselves. It was real musicians who were creating these ringtones. So I worked in such company creating the ringtones on softwares before it goes to video games and phones. And I also we opened this session with a video that I love, which is the Rio 2016 Paralympic Games. I was also part of a high-level sports team where I was swimming. I was a swimmer for many, many years. So all these people I see in the video, I know them, or almost all of them. Some of them changed today, but with the French, we shared national competitions and things like that. To come back to music, I'm fast tracking a little bit. I'm sent by my engineering company to work here in Toronto, and I realized that everything is accessible because there are laws. There are laws. The law in Ontario called the AODA, and we will talk about it a little bit further. But suddenly everything was accessible. I could take the transit, I could take the subway, which I could not do in France. I could go to university. And so I decided to go back to university and to complete my master. And right now I'm doing a PhD. I'm still in musicology. I'm still in history of music and studying the impact of music on society. But my specialty is about disability and music.
Amazing. There's a couple of questions. One I'll go to first, and then we'll get to some of the other stuff. But Liszt and Beethoven, what drew you to those composers?
My grandmother. We used to listen to a lot of Beethoven with my grandmother. She was a huge fan of Beethoven, and we were really listening and creating our moments together, going to concerts and just listening to the music together. And so we really bonded with, and then my grandfather for jazz. So I had that from my grandparents.
What jazz did your grandfather listen to?
My grandfather was a huge fan of Louis Armstrong, so we had lots of Louis Armstrong. But then my mother was also a fan of Ella Fitzgerald, so we listened to a lot of Ella Fitzgerald. And I consider Ella as my teacher, because I wasn't in my room practicing all the scats possible and imaginable in order to develop this technique of scatting. So right now I have the same range of voice. So I used to scat with Ella in my room all the time.
You mentioned AODA and how that's different, it being a part of sort of the legislation here and just accessibility. If people see, a lot of the older TTC stations, they're all being upgraded to make sure that people can get in. How does that change? It's a subtle thing for people who don't understand, but now being able to create, an autonomy for people with disabilities, that they don't have to rely on other people to help them get around or move around, and they can just be. How important has that been for you, coming from a place that didn't think that was as important, or maybe hasn't looked at how to integrate people of all abilities into society? How's that really changed? Is that part of the reason why you stayed, one? But how has that enabled you, or what doors does it open up to you, and what opportunities has it allowed for you to have that you may not have had before?
That's a great question. In fact, in France, we have a law, but it's pushed over and over again. And in Ontario, not in all Canada, we are very lucky to have this law in Ontario, which is the Disability Act for Accessibility of Ontario. It's that there are real rules that people have to follow. So if you have a public building, you have to put a ramp. If you construct something new, you have to put some level of accessibility. What changed for me was, for example, the use of buttons. I was so not used of the buttons to open the automatic doors. That's something that doesn't exist in France. And when I arrived, I used to push the doors like I was doing like that, like I was doing in France. And always I had someone saying, there was a button here. And I was, oh yeah, a button. But what made me stay, you're right about that, it's that it's such the public transit, for me, it was such a change. Just to be able to take the public transit and go to work with the subway or with the bus, it's so easy. And then also to work in a work environment and not to have to try to hide that you're disabled. I cannot hide it. I'm in a wheelchair, so I cannot hide it. But to try to say, no, everything will be fine, or to try to defend yourself. And there's nothing to defend. I mean, it's just the fact that I'm in a wheelchair, right? So, and then there are things that are facilitating my colleagues who are blind or with some loss of vision, with structures that you cannot really see, but they are on the street, they're everywhere. Like when you see this kind of little round nails on the ground, this is for blind people, before crossing streets. Or in the corridors of some stations, you have a kind of a plastic pattern that you can follow with your cane. This is to guide you. I find it amazing, the amount of accessibility features available in Toronto and in the rest of Ontario, what I've seen at least. yeah, so this is really, really important. It changed things.
Do you think it's a mindset thing? So, we talk about the ability, making things accessible. And is it easy for people to see a disability in one area and think that encompasses all areas? So therefore they don't make things accessible? Because, someone in a wheelchair still doesn't mean they have any loss of cognitive ability different than anybody else or things like that. But it feels like sometimes that's the case, that we start to take one aspect and think that is a reflection of all of the things that someone can or can't do. And do you think that there's a different way of looking at it in different cultures, and that's why people have made it more accessible in some places versus others?
Yes, definitely. There is a global assumption that a disability is a disability. It's a package with lots of disabilities included, which is absolutely not the case. We can have multiple disabilities, we can have only one disability, but what is important is the way disability is seen in society and the way people are perceiving disabilities. So it's still very much seen today that someone who has a very strong physical disability is assumed to have also a mental disability, which is absolutely not the case. So we often have that as conversations with friends, because even hotels, I just traveled in New Orleans for a conference, and I had the weirdest experience over there. They put me in a room that was supposed to be accessible, but it was accessible for someone who was probably deaf, and there were hearing loops everywhere, but it was certainly not accessible to a wheelchair. So they had to change me room. But when I discussed with the direction, they say there is a lack of training, because people just put accessible as a checkbox, and they just don't think, okay, accessible, what level of accessibility, what does the person need? So normally you would talk to the person and say, what is your need exactly? Do you need a wheelchair accessible bedroom because you're in a wheelchair? Or do you need, are you fine? Are you transferring or whatever? A quick conversation. But here, clearly they don't. So it moves slowly. I'm not saying things are not changing in our society. It's definitely changing a lot in these last 20 years. But it's still in our society, disability is still seen as something, either it's seen as something very sad, or you see someone who says, oh, I'm so sorry for you. Sure, I mean, it's great. I don't say that people should not feel sorry, but it's a fact. We have to accept what we have, and we have just to find ways to move in our society and to be included.
Yeah, no, I agree. The arts is, there's so many different artists that have had different abilities, and obviously blind being an easy one, because that seems to, there's a number of different artists, whether it's Stevie or Ray Charles or, Raul Midon. There's a lot of artists who have made really wonderful careers for themselves. You're doing a lot of research right now in music and accessibility, which is actually different than music therapy, which people might want to lump into the same space. What are some of the things that you found in your research that has been, new to you, maybe most interesting? What are some of the things that you wish people thought of more?
So there is a field that in academic world, you find so many interesting things. There is the study of music therapy, and there is also something that is called critical disability studies, which is the fact to think of the different models of disability in our society. And so it can be easy to define some patterns. For example, a medical pattern. When you go to a hospital and they will diagnose something, and then you become whatever. You become paraplegic, you have cerebral palsy, you have whatever. And this would be a medical model. The idea is for you to get better, even if you cannot, even if you're born with a condition, or the medical model will always say there is a way to get better. There is also the charitable model where it's like the Telethon, for example, or the charity that will say, let's collect money for these people to get better. Okay, and then the money, it's working on the pity of the people. I mean, even if it's hard to say that if you think of it in a different way than you're thinking of, they try to, let's have all these children with disabilities at the front to show that you should have pity for them and give money. And again, it can be seen from different sides, right? It can be seen from, great, it gives money for the research. We should definitely have that. But then if you look at the other side, and I like this idea of looking at the other side of the cup, there is always the other side of the cup. And this is existing in the different models of disabilities. My models that we as artists usually defend is called the social model of disability, which is really the fact to see disability as part of the society instead of saying it's a condition or it's a pity or it's a fact. It's here. We have disabilities everywhere in our society. We just have to find a way to be a better to include disability better in our society instead of seeing it as something that is always a constraint. Saying, okay, let's change our perspective and listen to things differently, play an instrument differently, see what can be done differently. So that's called the social model of disability.
Where have you seen, you just were at a conference, so do you have examples of where you've seen this work really well, or places, or I guess different, even in places like Toronto where it's very accessible, but doesn't mean everyone's doing the best job? Like, where are some of the best incubators for really just including accessibility and really access and really taking, I think what I get from that is that, you take people where they are and then you find ways to maximize the abilities that they do have so that they can participate in society. And so, we have to think, I think we have to think about that in many different areas. What are some of the best examples you've had of seeing that?
So the first examples were in the UK because they were the first to, the origin of critical disability studies was in the UK with an organization called UPIAS, which is a union for physically impaired in the UK, or society in the UK, something like that. And they said, enough is enough. We have to separate impairment and disability. Impairment is whatever we have. Disability is whatever we have in the social world, how we include ourselves. And UK, there were lots of musicians who said, okay, we have so many disabled musicians, give us some money and we will do that. And so it happened. They have received money from the government because unfortunately in our society, if you don't have a budget for something, then it won't happen. That's another problem. But and then some organizations decided to do entirely inclusive concerts with quiet rooms and looping aids for to connect to hearing aids for those who have hearing impairments, or guidelines for those who don't see, or guide dogs and wheelchair-free bar and whatever. And the concerts, and so many musicians were invited there. And also the first person to have changed the law in conservatories is from the UK, Evelyn Glennie. She's a percussionist from the UK. She's deaf, and she is awesome. She went to the Royal Conservatory of London and she said, let's change things. So it originated from then, and then it spread because we have ADA in America, which is the AODA in Ontario, this accessibility law. Before that, it was the Accessibility Act of America, right? So it was in the States, ADA, Accessibility Disability Act. And so in the States, then suddenly all these organizations started to say, let's create culture from our, let's do a strength, build a strength with our disability and build some arts, put that in arts. So for many years, there was no big groups that were really offering. Now it's changing. We have some, but at this time we had disability camps. There is a great movie on, I think it's still on Netflix. It's called Crip Camp, and this term crip, it's derived from the term cripple, which is an insult for a disabled, to say you're cripple. But with the medical model, it was a term that was really, really used, cripple. So let's say that we use cripple and we transform into crip art and crip music and crip camps and crips everywhere. And that's how they started to really act and to do great disability activism movements that led to where we are today in other countries, including in Canada, where we have great theater companies, dance companies, the music bands, things like that, composed of artists with disabilities.
Amazing. Well, while we're talking about the UK, you were gracious enough to lend some of your network to the students. And so we met with a gentleman named Kris Haplin, who has cerebral palsy, but he uses technology as a way of interacting with music. And Jasper actually put together a video for the students to see. So I wonder, maybe we should go to that video and we can see some ways that people with their abilities, how they can interact with music and how technology can facilitate some of that.
So yeah, Dyskinetic is the sort of one-man band world that I create for myself. Originally, it was literally just that, the name of the one-man band. It's a really functional name because I have dyskinetic cerebral palsy, so I literally got the band name from my medical condition. But it's become an inclusion strategy almost. I work with other disabled artists now, and I'm platforming other disabled musicians here in the UK. We're putting together a concert tour where there's like disabled artists on the bill, and we have this symbol, the tic-tac-toe, I think there's one there somewhere on the screen, which sort of represents this idea that, if I put my hand there, you can see it on there at the bottom, this idea that there are things in life that we look at and we know that they're wrong, but we kind of just accept them. Like the right answer is just being ignored there, and the wrong answer is being treated as if it's right. And that's kind of how I encourage people to think about disabling barriers and how society looks at disabled people. It means different things to different people, but it's at the heart of it, the idea of the tic-tac-toe is to just look for the truth and look for what's right in anything. Yeah, so I guess rather cheekily, I would say that the Mimi gloves represent possibly the first kind of social model musical instrument, because it's the complete inverse of the problem. When I was like 14 years old, I was sort of gently kicked out of piano lessons because my hand impairment meant that I couldn't access the repertoire that was being presented to me. And it was sort of sold to me very much with a medical model mindset, that it was like, well, could you get physio? Could you fix your hand? Is there something you could do? But the responsibility was on me to change to fit into the framework. The framework of the music lesson was totally fixed. It was on me. It was my responsibility to change to fit the music lesson. And that really sums up a kind of a medical model approach to music making. And the social model approach of recognizing the barriers rather than thinking that there's something wrong with me as a disabled person, I think is really neatly summed up in the Mimi gloves, because they're just the complete opposite. The gloves learn me and my impaired movement. It's not the other way around. The framework of the AI takes whatever movement I can give it and allows me to make meaningful musical choices with that movement. So that's kind of the big difference for me in terms of how I engage with music. So this is the kind of interface for the Mimi gloves. So if I take my left hand, you'll see on the screen, if I like move my hand like this, these sort of bend sensors in this section here are flexing. That's because there are literally sensors going across the back of my fingers that track what we call the postures. So this feeds the AI, which then determines what I'm doing with my hand. If you go along to this box here, where there's the sort of yellow section, if I make a fist, I've taught it that that's a fist. If I open my hand, it says open hand. This is what Imogen calls puppet hand. I'm just going to put that closer to the camera. Hopefully you can see that. There you go. So like you're sort of holding a puppet. One finger point is another common posture. And then I have my little custom posture, which I call plectrum, which is because I'm a guitar player at heart. It's like I'm holding a plectrum. So that's my little posture there. But that's fed from the AI. Sorry, the bend sensors are feeding the AI. So I've taught it those postures. In this middle section here, the gloves are tracking 3 things via a gyroscope at all times. So they have the yaw, which is that top line there, which is how far left or right my arm is. So as I move, that line moves with me. We also have pitch. Pitch isn't the musical understanding of pitch. Pitch, in this sense, is height. So as I move the gloves up and down, the little line goes up to say that it's tracking the pitch. And lastly, we have what we call roll, which is where it is in this space. So there's an X, Y, Z axis to this in terms of where it's tracking in space. So it knows if I'm up or forwards or right or left, my left and right. We also have an accelerometer, which tracks things like this. So if I make a flick of my wrist, I can activate that. So that could be a motion. I can do a drum hit. So in real terms, if I'll show you how that accelerometer works in real terms. So here's an example of how I would use the accelerometer with a posture. So if I make a fist, I can tell it that the fist is what we call a qualifier. So if I move my hand, nothing happens. But if I move my hand and make a fist, I get this drum, which I've programmed here. So that's a really simple use of the Mimi gloves, is to just do a kind of drum thing. But of course, that only really replicates how drums already work. It doesn't kind of unlock anything that I couldn't do with a traditional instrument. So then I started thinking, when I first got the gloves, this was basically the first thing I did. I started thinking, well, I could move the drums around in space, couldn't I? Because I could use those directions. And then that would free up this other hand to play something else. Now, of course, one of the big problems I have with a traditional instrument, accessing a keyboard, for example, is that I can't voice chords in the way that I would like to, because my hand hasn't got enough movement in it to do that. I can only make very simple shapes like a fist or something with my hand. But then I could use that impaired movement to actually create the sound. I could never voice those chords with my hand impairment. It'd just be too difficult for me. But I could just turn those very simple movements into the chord voicings, and I'll just teach it. When I make a fist up here, play this chord. Just going to move this microphone out of the way and give you a quick demo. One of the concepts that's really useful when you're dealing with accessible technology is the idea of one to many, the idea that one movement, in my case, an impaired movement, can lead to multiple outcomes. So I can control 2 synthesizers at once with this same movement. So I've added a bass guitar, no, a bass synth to that. Yeah, that's a synthy sort of bass, isn't it? But then if I'm going to do that, well, I could add more stuff to it. So why don't I just add some strings? idea. So Ableton just sees another hardware controller as if it was like I've got the push down here. But yeah, it just shows up in Ableton as another MIDI controller. All I'm doing is setting a kind of input saying, if I do this, send these MIDI notes. And then I've just written them to whatever synths I'm using in Ableton in this case. You could use other DAWs, but it's just Ableton is super convenient for this MIDI mapping stuff. Yeah, so I really think that all begins with the social model of disability. If we always look at disabling barriers rather than looking at disability as an impairment issue, like I always use the language to say that I don't have a disability. I am disabled by the barriers that both society and in this case music making creates. So look at the barriers that the disabled person faces rather than looking at what they quote unquote can't do.
Amazing. You know, it's funny. So for those in the audience, we met with Kris last week and got a chance to interview him. And, you know, I don't want to say you guys are lucky. I hate to use that word that way, but Jasper did a wonderful job in putting that video together and really helping us see and bring that to life. It's interesting because I'm sitting there looking at him. I'm like, even through the interview, I'm like, but what's his disability? It seemed especially the way he uses his hands, like, oh, he can't use them to just play piano the way, but obviously there are impairments which you know, really highlight the spectrum of disability, right? And I think when we talk about perceptions, and you mentioned it, and I know for me, it's like we have to remind ourselves that there's this spectrum, that it's just because there's a disability doesn't mean that they're completely disabled and they have no way of contributing, right? And that's a big part for us to remember. How did you meet Kris?
I'm doing a research in university, and it's my thesis. In fact, I'm writing it right now about this large spectrum of artists who changed the face of music with the fact that they're disabled. And it started with a research. It started with Beethoven. In fact, my first interest was in the impact of deafness on Beethoven's music. And then Liszt was about something else, but it came also in this research. And then I said, well, okay, so if these guys were able to do it, you know, years ago, centuries ago, what about today? What is happening today? Where are we in our society with that? And so I started that was for my master. So a few years ago, I started to interview people all around the world. And I interviewed Evelyn Glennie, I interviewed Kris Haplin, I interviewed people in the States, I interviewed people in India, I interviewed people in Egypt, in France, in Europe, in Germany, and it was fascinating. It was really, really good. I still do that today. I try to integrate new musicians to my research and to interview either on Zoom, or if I go to a country, because I travel a lot, I'm lucky on that. If I go, I still have my connections in Europe. So when I go back to Europe, I usually try to find new musicians to add to the collection and to have a discussion with them. So yeah, Kris was fantastic. And I always love speaking with Kris. He's so brilliant and his project is great. And also he's the first one who made me realize something about the new technologies, that the computer is a machine. And the computer doesn't care if the person is disabled. The computer just integrates whatever movement you send. So if you're able to do that, you can play a music piece with this computer and these gloves. And it really was like, wow, oh yeah, I should include a chapter about the use of new technology in music and disability.
There was, while I was studying at Berkeley, because I studied electronic music and sound design, and there were a group of kids who would always go to work in places and facilities where people had these different impairments. And there's a story while I was there that they had gone to one of these facilities, and there was a girl who had not moved at all. She hasn't been a part of anything. And through things that they were working on. So they had everything from these head nodes that you put on the crown, and your mind starts going, and that creates music, or you're on an iPad. And there was a girl who they'd gone in numerous times and hadn't done anything, and finally, with the iPad, she started to show some movement, and it actually unlocked the key of there was this idea that this person's not going to move at all, but having that music and that thing to focus on actually opened up the door. While he was playing, I thought to myself, these are technologies that when they're introduced, they're probably introduced by an able-bodied person. We know Imogen Heap, that's part. And so people may look at them as, oh, that's not really music. They're not a real musician, but they've unlocked a key and opened up doors for people who have accessibility issues to now participate in what's going on. So it's really cool to see how, as you go further into the technology, how it opens up doors in places that you didn't think would do that. So, we were fortunate enough. You also introduced us to Precious.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about RAMD, and we'll go to her video. So Ramped, do you call it Ramped or RAMPD?
It's called Ramped.
Ramped.
So Ramped, it's linked to Precious, but it's also linked to another great singer, who's a Latino Grammy Award representative singer called Lachi, and she's blind too. And I met Lachi for the same reason as Kris. I interviewed her 2 years ago, I think, and she was one of the persons who were certain that what was needed in our society was more than just a few talks about disability and music. And the Grammy Awards, and she started to bug the Grammy Awards, saying, guys, we should do a panel about music and disability. And so they invited Lachi to do this panel, and she invited people in the States, like people who are really active in music and who have a disability. And it was a great conversation. I was there. It was an online panel. And after that, the Grammy Awards came back to Lachi and said, oh, we will come back to you with some other ideas. And like, to you, but who you? It's just a bunch of artists who are individuals. So she said, okay, we need an organization. And they got together with another musician called Galen Lee. She's a violin player. She's in a wheelchair, and she's developed a new method of playing that is awesome. She uses the violin as if she was holding a cello. And she has a pedal loop that she has somewhere on a wheelchair, and she is a great singer. So these two, Lachi and Galen Lee, were on the panel and said, okay, let's create an organization. And in January 2022, so beginning of this year, they launched Ramped. They did a quick call for participation of professional musicians with disabilities. And they just hired some people to think of what this association could be, this cohort of musicians. And Precious Perez is the vice president of Ramped. So we have Lachi as a president. We have Precious Perez as a vice president, and Galen Lee as the co-founder. And oh no, she's the VP. Yeah, I mean, they are all interchangeable. They are doing all the three of them are doing a lot of different things together. So when I talked to Lachi, she said, oh, you should really talk to Precious and have her as a guest for CMST.
Amazing. Jasper, let's go to the video of Precious.
My name is Precious Perez, singer, songwriter, music educator, disability advocate, and I am a Hispanic woman with dark curly hair of Puerto Rican descent. And my specialties are in pop, R&B, and Latin. And my overall goal as an artist is to be at the forefront of the Latin music industry as the first blind Latina, because when you think about it, you think of blind musicians, you think Stevie Wonder and Ray Charles. They're fantastic, but what about women? And what about Latina women? So that's the space I want to fill. I will give you a snippet, verse and chorus of one of my absolute favorite songs. This one is from my heart. It's called Agua de Valencia. I wrote it when I was studying abroad in Spain, and it's actually the name of a drink. And I'm essentially, the lyrics are comparing the drink to my now husband. And it's a really fun, upbeat, kind of just love song, and it's dancey and celebration. So I'll just do a little bit of that. Cuando te pregunto, siempre estás ahí para validar mis sentimientos y alejar el dolor. Sabes, encantado, como una poción mágica, con cada sobro tú me dibujas. Agua de Valencia, eres mi preferencia. Cada momento contigo se siente como una luna de miel. Agua de Valencia, agua de Valencia, agua de Valencia, tú eres mi preferencia. For me, my pursuit of music has always been bigger than me. I started pursuing music when I was younger. I was painfully shy as a kid. And when I say painfully shy, like I couldn't even answer a question without being in tears. So I found solace in my little Barbie karaoke machine when I was 6 years old in my bedroom, just like jamming out. And I thought nobody could hear me, but apparently my family did, even though I didn't want them to. And then I, went to elementary school, did choir. I, in middle school, started performing at open mics and things like that. It wasn't really until high school that I got formal vocal training on scholarship, and that, I think, really changed the trajectory of me being able to pursue music and realize that music is something I could pursue, like I loved it, I was passionate about it. But I didn't realize that there were so many facets within music. There's songwriting, there's education, there's all these different things, because I'm very passionate about poetry, and I love like flowery language. That's a huge passion of mine, creative writing, outside of writing song lyrics. So in high school, I realized that I could pursue music, and I had a teacher that really believed in that and believed in what I was doing and helped me. Bless my teacher, the visually impaired, because she took an entire Braille music course just so she could teach me how to read it, because she knew if you're going to do music, you need to know this, at least know the basics. And so that really helped me once I went to Berkeley, because Berkeley, we had ear training classes. And so we had to read rhythms and melodies, and I had the Braille books available to me and was able to read along with my classmates and really just feel confident in that. I just graduated with a dual degree in performance and music education from Berklee College of Music. And I've been a teaching artist in the past, working with grades K through 2 and grade 5 as a disabled educator. And I now currently work at a preschool as a co-lead teacher. So there's just a lot going on as far as my hand in different pots as far as disability and visibility and music ed and music and just education in general. I feel like there's so much I could say, so I don't want to keep rambling. I'll let you ask more questions. My current job is a co-lead preschool teacher. So it's a lot of playing, a lot of trying to integrate music into like cleanup time, playing the cleanup song, going around and counting down from 5. Who can pick up the toy the fastest? Let's go. And, playing with puppets, because puppets and music go together really, really well. Different like skits and things that you can do. I'm mostly singing and using my ukulele and getting them to do like call and response and movement. And sometimes I'll bring out the drum. I have this drum. Actually, I have one right here. This little mini djembe. And then like I'll do that and then I'll play it, twice through and be like, okay, freeze when the music stops, and then I'll just stop playing randomly, and they freeze, and then I'll like, put your hand on your knee, and then like just kind of interact with them, and then they get to try the drum and explore with it. The older kids really liked to just kind of pass it around and make beats while they were listening to their favorite song or make up their own patterns. So it's a lot of exploration, a lot of just letting them find what calls to them and then nurturing that. So that's kind of how I approach it as far as just in the classroom. I really believe in like internalizing music first and hearing it first and feeling it first, because that's kind of how I operate. I read Braille music, and I can, Sibelius and different writing softwares are now accessible to me as a blind person, so I can now interact with those things. But for me, I've always learned the best by ear, and when I can really feel and like connect to the song that I'm learning, or really just be able to pick up things really quickly. Like, I'm very quick at picking up lyrics and melodies, and so I feel like it makes the most sense to really connect through music that way, and then everything else comes later. But I feel like the heart is really where it starts. But what I am able to do is just really teach them about sharing and interacting and playing and music and just nurturing tiny humans. So I really love it. So since RAMPed began and since I became a part of it, I'm honored to be the current vice president and memberships chair, so very happy to be so involved. And for me, part of our mission is elevating disability culture, and that really resonates with me as a disabled artist and a disabled educator, as far as really being upfront about my disability and unashamed and celebrating it, because I think society has a tendency to look at disability as something that is negative, as something that needs to be fixed. We go against that in the social model, and it's really just disability should be celebrated and uplifted and represented adequately. The one thing I would say is keep going. If you love it, if you enjoy it, keep doing it. Because the truth is, not everybody is born at the skill level they end up at. I was nowhere near where I am vocally when I was 13 versus now. My songs weren't as good back then. We all have growth and progression. So even if you start out loving something and it doesn't sound quite as good, or you're not quite there, keep going, keep learning, keep growing, and you'll get to where you want to be. But don't give up. When I think about the biggest challenges regarding disability, even like in music and outside of music, is people's perceptions, really. Because the way that people look at disability and the stigma that's around it affects what happens when I walk into a room as a disabled musician. And so I think, especially in college too, like for me, I was the first blind music education major student. So I wasn't the first blind student at Berklee, but I was the first to go through that major. So I had to prove myself every day in every way that I could do the thing that a lot of them, the administration wasn't sure I could do as a blind person. And I didn't have room to mess up and make mistakes. And I had to have the answers that really I didn't have all the time. So the perception of, oh, well, I don't know how to do this, I don't know how to help you, is really the issue. Because really it's an attitude thing. I've had people come up to me and say, what do you need? Whatever you need, we will make this work, and it'll be great. It'll be fine. And those are the ideal situations because it's not about knowing how to help me or how to do everything. It's about having the attitude that we will figure it out, and it might be a little different and I might do it a little differently, but that doesn't mean I can't. Versus already believing that I'm not going to succeed and not knowing how I'm going to do this, and then me having to have that responsibility of proving myself to someone or a group of people constantly. And that's not a healthy pressure to be under for anybody. We are here fighting for access in a world that is struggling to be accessible, even though it's not as hard as they think.
It was really lovely spending some time with Precious. She was so great and had some wonderful insights. You know, when it comes to education, you know, what are some of the things that we as educators can do? What are things just as musicians we can do to help things change and evolve and just make and bring more people into this world, right? You know, there's not, we've moved from I was hearing someone once say, you know, as we've crossed the century barrier and the tuning hasn't changed, which is one of the first times in, you know, over 100 years that hasn't moved. We now move into a space where timbres become really important, and textures and colors really open up the doors for how you decide to create music and what that even means to create music. I'm curious what you think about that.
Yes, it's absolutely true. So as it starts with, as we have seen with Precious, it often starts with teachers who are not afraid to go further than what they've learned themselves as educators. So I heard that, for example, Galen Lee, she told me about this teacher of hers who said, you know, you have a very good pitch, so I don't have any issue to have you in the orchestra. Now we have to figure out what instruments you're going to play and how, because obviously you cannot hold the instrument as everybody else. So let's think of a way together. What can you do? And it's the same as Kris. Kris was saying, I have limited movements. How can I use these movements and create something? We've seen in the video at the very beginning that there is a pianist who plays just with what is remaining from how his arms have grown from birth. And it's only this long, but with that, or a little bit longer, but with that, you can use that the same way we're using fingers. Okay, let's think of something here. Or, you know, like it's okay. So if we have someone born with only one hand, and we can make this hand strong hands on the keyboard, no problem to play the piano. You just need to find the right adaptation, the right teachers, the right people. There is a pianist in Toronto who also told me about his experience in university. In fact, he studied in the States, and his teacher assumed what he could do and not do, but in a good way, because he came up with a lot of different things and saying, if we can do that, then we will have the mirror. If we can do that, then we will have this, that, this, that. And he had placed a mirror so that he could see the position of his hands, but be behind the piano and guide him, even if he was not seeing his hands. I'm not giving lots of details right now, but a new technique, something that nobody else but him imagined, in probably, like, I don't know, in the kitchen doing some tea and saying, how can I do that? And that I love. So it's about talking with the teachers and about their students. And when they have a student who might play differently, what can this student do? And with that, what can the teacher do to make to teach music? That's a fascinating topic. There are so many ways to do that.
That's awesome. Well, Jasper is going to put a link in that you'd recommend for any of the students who are looking to learn more about music and accessibility. And it's got great examples of how technology is helping musicians thrive. So really thank you for that. We're going to open up the floor right now and actually to questions. As usual, we have members from CMST Youth Committee joining us this evening. So big shout out and appreciation to all of you. If there are any questions from the Youth Committee or audience members, please feel free to raise your hand or put your question in the chat and unmute yourself.
There's a question in the chat. When would you say you discovered a passion for music? Oh, I don't know. I probably was born with it. And my mother tells me that she was listening to music when she was pregnant, and she was listening to Ella Fitzgerald, and she's certain that that's why I'm a singer. That's why I'm singing today.
Great. Well, I won't. I'll save the awkward silences, even though I'm so good at them and love them. But since I have a show actually to go to in the Daniel Spectrum, it's a good time for me to just give a big thank you to you, Diane. Please send our thanks as well to Kris and Precious. I know we've already said thank you to them, but it was really wonderful that they made some time for the students. And, you know, although it's not in my notes, I want to just give another big shout out, although it gets into my notes later, but Jasper's done such a really great job. Not just bringing this show together, but putting those videos together so we could really see and have the both of them kind of come to life for us in this show. Kris is in the UK, so time zone wise, this made the most sense to have him on. Precious is also in Boston, so it was a great way for us to include them without having them to have to be here live. If you'd like to follow Kris and his work with the Miyu gloves, as well as Precious, and there will be handles in the chat. So at Kris Haplin and or the Mimu gloves at Mimu gloves, Precious at Precious _ Puerto Rican 20, and Ramped at Ramped _up. Diane, you can find her at www.dianekolin.com to find more of her research. A big thank you to Simone and Temla and the Youth Committee for supporting this event. Thanks to Jasper again for doing all the work behind the scenes. Please check back with us, the YouTube channel, for previous talks, and this talk will be up at some point. I'm Thompson Egbo-Egbo, and this concludes the 15th installment of CMST Talks. We leave you with a little live performance from singer and guitarist Raul Midon, who happens to be blind, performing Song Shadow from a 2018 recording. Thank you for being here with us, and talk to you soon.
This is a song called Sound Shadow. You can change the way you look with plastic on your face. Change your name, your point of view, the meaning of your race, your partner, your religion, the places that you go. No matter what you do or change, I will always know, 'cause I'm your sound shadow. I'm your sound shadow. For as long as you're alive, I'll be by your side, 'cause I'm your sound shadow. Shadows in the moonlight, shadows every day, shadows after midnight to carry you away. Shadows